Sir Chance, I'd like to return to your childhood. At the age of 6, you were taken from your mother's home in blitz-bombarded Whitechapel and placed with a family near Barnstable.
It's funny, you know, Mr. Turnham always used to say, dig for victory, and I'd spend the whole afternoon with the shovel out in the garden without knowing what I was trying to win. But out of the kindness of his heart, he had given me lodgings and allocated me brat-breaking work, and I felt I owed him a debt of gratitude, if not a debt of currency. He said we needed to send sprouts to the front, but we never went to the front because it directly faced the road.
Mr. Turnham was later exposed as a spy. How did that make you feel?
Relief.
Why?
Well, if he's in Devon monitoring the growth of seasonal vegetables, then he wasn't much use to the Germans, was he?
And while you were in Devon, your mother began a passionate affair with your father.
That's right, though. They were both in an unstable marriage at the time.
Well, their own?
Yes, their own. But then they met each other one night at the cinema, and they had such a good evening, they went home with each other.
The home they both owned?
That's right.
And what of your own love life at that time?
I suppose, like most boys at the age of 8, I preferred invertebrates to girls. Anything that scurried without the use of a spine I admired greatly. I once tracked a beetle through the woods for 17 hours.
And what were your findings?
He enjoyed lingering on the damp underside of logs.
And it was at the age of 10 that you had your first beer. Did that first taste have the flavour of future alcohol abuse that would later see you fitted with a pioneering robotic liver?
You know, it's easy to look back now and say I should never have drunk 3 bottles of whiskey a day for 30 years. But it became a routine, like locking the door of a house or cleaning your teeth in a sink. The liver was an experiment doomed to failure.
Why was that?
Well, 1 sip of malt whiskey and the bugger rusted. I followed it up with a swig of Brasso, but there was no saving him.
And how was that resolved?
I went back to an analogue liver from someone in the Gulf, where they don't drink.
It's distressing to hear you speak about it in such an offhand way. After all, it was a weakness that prevented you from achieving a dream. That dream being, of course, of captaining your country at cricket.
It was a dream, but never an ambition. There weren't many men around during the war because they were all off fighting in tunics, and so the selectors really had to look high and low to pull the team together. The story goes that Colonel Sodbright, the head selector and Archbishop of Canterbury, and how he combined those 2 roles would make an excellent subject for a book. He managed to find a few boys in Sussex scowling behind a tree, but was still 3 players short when he reached Somerset.
And had you played before?
I'd never played before. I'd picked up a bat in anger once, but it bit me and flew off. I was amazed when I got the call up.
And how long was it before you made your debut?
Well, Sodbright found me picking blackberries just before dusk on a Sunday. 11 o'clock Monday, there I am, opening the batting at Lord's.
What did it feel like facing your first ball?
Well, I was nervous, of course. I was wearing unusual clothing, so I naturally assumed it was an important occasion. Thankfully, the crowd were behind me, because if anyone had looked me in the eye, I think I would have buckled under the pressure.
It must have come as a surprise then, when you struck the fastest century in the history of the game.
Do you know, I still receive anonymous postcards saying, well batted, and perhaps my favourite, bish, bash, bosh. But what people forget is that the Germans had just as many problems with player availability as we did, especially when Hitler declared war on Russia between the first and second test.
Yes, I mean, it's strange now to think of the Germans playing cricket.
Well, of course, these days they prefer to play football and dance energetically in shorts, but for a brief time they were the best team in the world. Hitler was very keen on cricket. That's why he invaded Poland, because they walked in front of the sight screen during an over. Of course, you won't read that in the history books.
And you were offered the captaincy on a long-term trial basis. But you stank of booze when your services were dispensed with.
You know, you can't represent your country drunk unless you're in the Foreign Office, and I think they made the right decision. I was a liability, both in the field and in the corridors of power. Embarking on a professional career in a sport in which you played a solitary fixture brings enormous pressure, and in the end I thought proficiency in literacy, numeracy and cycling would serve me better.
And still only 13, your height was already alarming.
It was. I'd struggled to walk through archways. Mr. Turnham refused to see us as a hindrance, of course, and he sought financial gain through securing me employment at a circus. He said rather than him laugh at me at home, other people may as well have a good old chuckle at me in a large marquee and pay for the privilege. He saw an advert in the paper and I applied.
Imagine allowing people to laugh at your expense.
Well, it would be at their expense because they pay to get in.
But your interview didn't go well.
You know, it was awkward. I assumed that the only qualification required would be my height, but that wasn't the case. My interviewer said he wasn't impressed that I didn't wear a suit and that I let myself down badly in verbal reasoning. They gave the job to an accountant from Exeter.
And what tricks could he do?
Add up numbers.
It's no secret that you lost 2 foot in your 20s. Was that the result of dieting?
Diet was certainly a part of it. I mean, I avoided milk and vegetables, but there came a point when the stooping exercises and the dietary regime simply weren't providing the results I wanted. And in the end, it was only a nightly vigil with a pumice stone that made the difference. Gradually I lost height, incrementally at first, and then the inches just fell off. It was a great relief, although I remember being upset once when I went to a fairground. I was now too short for a ride I enjoyed as a child.
Was there a temptation to keep shrinking past what would be considered civilised?
I remember getting to 5'10" and feeling quite satisfied, but by then, losing height through the application of a rough surface on soft, yielding skin had become a drug.
And when you reached 5 foot, did you feel like it was time to stop then?
Well, when I was smaller than most miners, it dawned on me that if I kept going, I'd be the same height as a child. Seeing over a garden wall into the privacy of a neighbouring plot had been a privilege I'd enjoyed that had been lost.
Were there ever times when you hated yourself?
I remember getting a concessions rate when I went to the Science Museum. That's when I knew I had to stop.
And although you were shorter, you still had enormous arms. How did you deal with that?
I was so single-minded about my height that I neglected my reach, and consequently I was quite imbalanced.
And was there a solution?
Well, there was a Harley Street doctor who suggested pinning the forearms back to create a kind of wing, but in the end the process was just too expensive. I had trousers especially made with deep pockets, so my arms would look normal as they entered the pocket, but would in truth be clasping my shins.
And what if you wore shorts?
Shorts were a luxury I denied myself. It does have some benefits though, I can make a cup of tea in the kitchen while watching a film in the lounge.
And it was in your late teens when you returned from summer in the Orient was almost responsible for starting a pandemic.
In Bali they have a quaint custom that if you befriend their national bird,
The fluted wren.
as you say, the fluted wren, that it could have its own seat completely free of charge at the state's expense on the flight home. I reasoned that if I had more elbow room with that arrangement and book the seats.
Not realising that the fluted wren, was riddled with pestilence.
I first grew suspicious when I shook hands with a stewardess on disembarking the plane and her shaking became violent.
And spread from the hand.
Well, that's right, it began with a hand. But then her arm started to shake. I thought it must be a traditional Balinese gesture of goodwill, but then her shoulder and back started violently shaking, and I remember thinking, you're either a very talented and courteous woman, or you're about to die.
And in the end, she did die.
She did. And they made me sit in an ambulance that was then cordoned off.
A kind of quarantine.
Precisely. The whole airport had to be evacuated. But the fluted wren had forgotten to return his earphones, and so was allowed to go back to the plane. They're very fastidious about these details on Aeroflot. Unfortunately, the fuselage had rattled loose following the pneumatic effect of the stewardess's seizure and caught fire on impact with the runway,
Killing the wren.
and saving the human race in the process.
There are many events that could rank as your lowest ebb, but perhaps it was your very, very public divorce from Princess Anne that has brought you most public hostility.
All Anne wanted was a violently romantic liaison out of the public glare, which is why I suggested Balmoral.
A royal palace.
Exactly. The royal family were all at Windsor. The flag wasn't flying and it seemed quiet.
What most upset you about the ensuing scandal?
Upset is the wrong word. I became disillusioned not just with Anne's body, but with the whole country as a whole. There are many couples who enjoy naturalism. To holiday as God intended without the need for a suitcase is a wonderful sensation.
And do you now regret filming the incident?
It was for our own private enjoyment. How it leaked within hours and was available in every video rental store in the British Isles remains a mystery.
This in spite of the director's voiceover which you provided, and the self-attributed quote that appears on the sleeve which reads, "You must watch this."
You're not the first to apportion blame in this episode.
And it was an episode, later to be turned into a 6-part series in the Netherlands.
It was a long time ago. Anne has moved on. We speak from time to time about the royalties.
Her family, you mean?
No, royalties from the film. And she's comfortable and so am I.
Your son Jasper, he was conceived around this time.
Yes, but not by Anne.